My dad left me the family restaurant over my golden child brother, and he did not take it well. He started trying to sabotage me and frame me for felonies, so I took extreme measures to get him to back off. Ever since I can remember, my brother Marcus was always the golden boy in our family. Our dad Anton, everyone called him Chef Anton, practically worshipped the ground Marcus walked on. Dad would spend hours teaching Marcus all these special family recipes, while I was stuck washing dishes in the back of our family restaurant. I still remember how Dad's face would light up whenever Marcus chopped vegetables, but he barely even noticed when I completely overhauled the restaurant's accounting system when I was just 16. Marcus got sent off to this fancy culinary school in New York while I stayed behind working at the restaurant. I gradually took over all the business operations that actually kept the place afloat during the tough times. Mom, Eleanor, always tried to play peacemaker between us, but even she couldn't deny how obviously Dad favored Marcus. After culinary school, Marcus landed this supposedly high-profile chef job at some trendy Manhattan restaurant. He barely came home after that, always too busy for family holidays or helping out when business slowed down. Meanwhile, I devoted 15 freaking years of my life to our restaurant, working side by side with my aging dad as we weathered economic downturns and changing neighborhood demographics that threatened our survival. Then Dad had a massive heart attack right in the kitchen during dinner service. I was the one who called the ambulance and rode with him to the hospital. I was the one who held his hand every day until he passed away 3 weeks later. Marcus flew in for the funeral, of course, but left the next day because of work commitments. Everyone had already congratulated him on owning the family restaurant at this point, so you can imagine everyone's shock, especially Marcus, when the lawyer read Dad's will and revealed he'd left the entire restaurant to me. The note attached simply said, "To the child who truly loved this place." Marcus turned bright red and started stuttering about how there must be some mistake. Now he's suddenly moved back to town with his designer luggage and expensive chef knives, claiming Dad wasn't thinking straight when he changed his will, and he's prepared to fight for what he believes should be his. The day after the will reading, I arrived at the restaurant early to start prepping for a busy Friday service. I was surprised to find the back door already unlocked. When I walked into the kitchen, there was Marcus, wearing a crisp white chef coat, examining all the equipment and making notes on a fancy tablet. I said good morning, but he completely ignored me, continuing his inspection like I wasn't even there. When I mentioned that as the legal owner, I should be informed about any evaluations of the kitchen equipment, he snorted and said something about temporary arrangements. Then I caught him trying to access the office where we keep all the financial files. I had to physically block the doorway while he tried to push past me. I'm not a small person, but neither is Marcus, and it almost got physical before he backed off, muttering something about me playing restaurant owner. My hands were literally shaking as I called Thomas, our family lawyer. I needed to confirm that my ownership was legally solid, and Marcus couldn't just bulldoze his way in. Thomas sounded uncomfortable on the phone and admitted that Marcus had already contacted him, claiming I had somehow manipulated Dad into changing his will during his illness. Thomas assured me that the will seemed properly executed, but advised caution until the situation was resolved. Basically, useless lawyers speak for, I don't want to get in the middle of this. Later that day, I called an emergency staff meeting to reassure everyone that their jobs were secure and nothing would change dramatically under my ownership. Most of our staff had been with us for years and were practically family. I was halfway through outlining my plans for the next few months when Marcus barged in, interrupting me mid-sentence. He started telling the staff about all these grand plans he had, promised raises, kitchen renovations, and a completely revamped menu that would bring the restaurant into this century. I could literally see the staff splitting into factions before my eyes. The older employees who'd known me for years looked uncomfortable, while some of the newer kitchen staff seemed excited by Marcus's flashy promises. The next morning, I tried to access the restaurant's bank accounts to pay our produce vendor, but my online banking access was denied. After a panicked call to the bank, I discovered that Marcus had somehow convinced our mother to request a temporary freeze on all the accounts due to the disputed ownership situation. I had to drain $3,000 from my personal savings just to pay our most pressing bills. I was furious and called Mom immediately. She invited both of us for dinner to discuss a compromise like adults. That dinner was a complete disaster. Mom made her special lasagna, probably thinking comfort food would somehow make this easier. We barely made it through the salad course before Marcus started bringing up ancient history, how Dad had always wanted him to take over the restaurant, how I was just the numbers person, and how Dad must have been confused from his medication when he changed his will. Mom just sat there nodding sympathetically at both of us without taking a side. When she suggested we share ownership, I lost it and stormed out. I couldn't believe she was trying to play both sides after everything I'd done. The next morning, I discovered Dad's original handwritten recipe book was missing from the office safe. This wasn't just any recipe book. It contained all our family's signature dishes with Dad's personal notes and modifications spanning decades. When I confronted Marcus, he gave me this innocent look and claimed he hadn't seen it, but I noticed he wouldn't make eye contact. With weekend service approaching and no recipe book, I had to recreate all our signature dishes from memory. I'd watched Dad make them thousands of times, but there were always little details and measurements that were hard to remember perfectly. The weekend service was stressful enough, but then I discovered Marcus had invited 3 local food critics to dine on Saturday night, claiming he'd taken over kitchen operations. He hadn't bothered to tell me, so we hadn't prepared enough of our specialty ingredients. The service was absolute chaos, with me running between the kitchen and dining room trying to smooth things over. The reviews were mediocre at best, with one critic noting that the restaurant seemed to be suffering from an identity crisis. I was so stressed I called my cousin Sydney for some emotional support. Sydney and I had always been close, and I expected her to be on my side. Instead, she hesitantly admitted that most of the extended family believed Marcus should run the restaurant because of his professional culinary experience. According to Sydney, everyone was saying I should be reasonable and recognize where my talents actually lie. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever. A few days later, Mom called to confess that Marcus had scheduled a family meeting to discuss the situation, but had only invited relatives he knew would support him. She felt guilty for not telling me sooner, but claimed she was caught in the middle. I decided to attend anyway, walking into Uncle Pete's house to find practically the entire extended family already seated in the living room. Marcus stood at the front like he was giving a corporate presentation, complete with a little slideshow about his vision for the restaurant's future. The ambush was perfectly orchestrated. One by one, relatives cited my lack of culinary expertise and how Dad had always intended for Marcus to take over. Aunt Diane suggested I was better suited to an office job with regular hours, rather than the demanding restaurant business. By the end of the meeting, I was questioning whether I actually deserved the restaurant at all. The only good thing that happened that week was Uncle Buster returning from his 3-month trip to Europe. Buster was Dad's younger brother and had always treated Marcus and me equally. He showed up at the restaurant during prep time, giving me one of his bear hugs and immediately recognizing the tension in the kitchen. Marcus tried to pull him aside, offering him some expensive scotch he'd brought back from Manhattan, but Buster wasn't having it. He loudly proclaimed that Anton knew exactly what he was doing with his will, and that I had earned my inheritance through years of loyalty. This caused an immediate family rift, with several relatives calling Buster to reason with him. Buster revealed to me later that Dad had actually confided his decision to him months before his heart attack. According to Buster, Dad had been disappointed by Marcus's lack of interest in the family business for years, and had decided I was the one who truly cared about his legacy. When I mentioned this at our next uncomfortable family dinner, Mom immediately challenged Buster's claim, saying Dad would never make such an important decision decision without discussing it with her first. This led me to request access to Dad's recent correspondence with Thomas, our lawyer. After some negotiation, Thomas agreed to share copies of Dad's emails from the 6 months before his death. The emails clearly show Dad's intention to leave me the restaurant, with specific mentions of my dedication and Marcus's absence. In one particularly pointed email, Dad wrote, "The restaurant should go to the child who sacrificed for it, not the one who visits when convenient." When Marcus was shown these emails, he claimed they could have been written under duress, or that I had somehow influenced Dad during his illness. He threatened a lengthy court battle if I didn't agree to either sell the restaurant or give him controlling interest. That night, I discovered the restaurant was in worse financial shape than I'd realized. Dad had been covering some shortfalls from his personal savings during his final year, something he hadn't shared with me. Marcus somehow found out about this and used it as ammunition, telling anyone who would listen that I clearly couldn't handle the business side either. I worked through the night creating a detailed business recovery plan, analyzing everything from menu pricing to staffing schedules. Meanwhile, Mom started spending more time at the restaurant, watching me work and asking detailed questions about operations. At first, I thought she was finally showing interest in my side of things, but then I overheard her on the phone reporting details to Marcus about our inventory levels and customer counts. I couldn't even trust my own mother anymore. The situation got even weirder when Uncle Buster invited me for coffee at the diner across from the restaurant. He wanted to share more about Dad's decision, but kept getting mysterious calls that he declined each time. After the third call, he looked genuinely uncomfortable and kept checking over his shoulder. I suspected Marcus was trying to pressure him too. Buster finally told me that 5 years ago, Dad had offered Marcus a partnership in the restaurant. It would have been a perfect arrangement, Marcus running the kitchen while I handled the business side. I was shocked because I'd never known about this offer. According to Buster, Marcus had flatly rejected it, saying he didn't want to be stuck in a family restaurant forever. Dad had been deeply disappointed but never told me, probably to avoid creating more family tension. This revelation made me feel both validated in Dad's choice, but also manipulated since this crucial information had been kept from me. The next day, I confronted Marcus about the rejected partnership. He was stirring a pot of his signature mushroom soup, which was actually Dad's recipe that he'd slightly modified, and barely looked up when I mentioned it. He dismissed the whole thing as Dad trying to control my career, and claimed he'd been on the verge of a major breakthrough in New York at the time. I asked him point blank if he had ever actually wanted the restaurant, or if he just couldn't stand the idea of me having it. He didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. Later that week, while going through old financial records, I discovered something that made my blood boil. Marcus had secretly borrowed over $50,000 from the restaurant over the past decade, with the largest withdrawal coinciding with the opening of his friend's restaurant in Brooklyn. There was no record of repayment. Dad had apparently been covering for him, categorizing the withdrawals as consulting fees in the books. I considered making this information public, but worried it would damage the restaurant's reputation with suppliers who might question our financial stability. Instead, I confronted Marcus privately, showing him copies of the transfers and asking for an explanation. For once, Marcus couldn't talk his way out of it. He admitted to the loans but claimed Dad had forgiven them as investment in his future. When I asked to see any documentation of this arrangement, he conveniently couldn't produce any. I told him if he wanted any stake in the business moving forward, he needed to repay the money with interest. Mom overheard us arguing in the office and walked in without knocking. When Marcus explained the situation in his typical dramatic fashion, Mom defended him, saying the loans were what any parent would do for their child pursuing their dreams. I couldn't help asking why my college tuition hadn't been similarly funded. I'd worked restaurant shifts to pay my way through business school while Marcus got a free ride at culinary school. Mom's face fell, and she reluctantly admitted there had been some favoritism over the years. "Your father always saw something special in Marcus's talents," she said quietly. "He thought Marcus needed more support to succeed." That stung more than I wanted to admit. Things escalated when Marcus began spreading rumors among staff and suppliers that I had mismanaged the restaurant's finances while caring for Dad during his illness. He implied that was the real reason for our current cash flow problems. Kim, our longest-serving server who'd been with us for 15 years, overheard him telling this to a wine distributor and immediately defended me, describing how I'd kept the restaurant running while also spending hours at the hospital. Marcus was so angry about her interference that he tried to have her fired, claiming she had been rude to customers. I refused to fire Kim, telling Marcus he had no authority to make staffing decisions. In retaliation, he threatened to contact the health inspectors with concerns about our kitchen practices. Not wanting to take any chances, I closed the restaurant early one night and organized the entire staff for an emergency deep clean of the kitchen. We scrubbed every surface, reorganized the walk-in refrigerator, and checked all temperature logs. Sure enough, a health inspector showed up during dinner service the very next day. He seemed surprised to find everything immaculate and admitted someone had called in an anonymous tip about food storage issues. The inspection ended with a perfect score, and the staff celebrated after closing. Marcus's plan had completely backfired, actually earning me more loyalty from the staff who appreciated my proactive approach. While searching for some tax documents in Dad's old filing cabinet, I discovered that he had been developing a cookbook before his death. There were draft chapters, recipe tests, and notes about food photography, but the completed manuscript was missing. When I confronted Marcus, he finally admitted he had taken it, claiming the cookbook represented their father's true legacy that should be published under the family name. Specifically, his name as the chef. Looking through the partial drafts that remained, I recognized several recipes I had actually helped develop, including our popular rosemary lemon chicken that I'd created when Dad was trying to add lighter options to the menu. I demanded co-authorship rights if the cookbook ever moved forward. Cousin Zach, who works in publishing, offered to mediate the cookbook situation. We met at his downtown office, but it quickly became clear that Zach favored Marcus's vision for a glossy, chef-focused cookbook, rather than the family history approach I envisioned. I felt cornered into compromising just to keep the project alive, agreeing to a smaller credit as contributor, rather than co-author. A couple days later, while cleaning out Dad's desk drawer, I found an old flash drive I hadn't seen before. It contained dozens of voice memos Dad had recorded about the cookbook. I sat in the empty restaurant after closing, listening to my father's voice describing recipes and their history. To my surprise, many entries specifically praised my innovations. "Olivia's touch with the lemon rosemary marinade transformed this dish," he said in one recording. "Her business sense told me customers wanted lighter options, but her palate knew how to keep the flavor profound." I felt tears streaming down my face hearing Dad acknowledge my contributions so clearly. When I played some of these recordings for Marcus, he dismissed them as Dad being nice and said they were probably just to encourage me. But he couldn't explain why Dad had specifically credited me with creating several signature dishes that were now restaurant favorites. For the first time, some family members who heard the recordings began questioning Marcus's narrative about being the only one with culinary talent. The next twist came when Mom suggested selling the restaurant entirely and splitting the proceeds. Over lunch at her house, she casually mentioned needing money for retirement and thought this would solve everyone's problems. I was stunned until I realized her neutrality had been financially motivated all along. I offered to include Mom in the business operations with a small salary for greeting customers a few nights a week, but discovered Marcus had already promised her a substantial monthly stipend if he gained control of the restaurant. Despite our tight finances, I realized I needed to match this offer to maintain any chance of keeping Mom from fully supporting Marcus. One night around 11 p.m., I drove back to the restaurant to grab some paperwork I'd forgotten and found Mom in the office looking through financial records. Her explanation about wanting to understand the business better sounded rehearsed and nervous. The next day, I installed security cameras in the office, explaining to staff they were part of an upgraded security system. The following night, the footage showed Mom carefully photographing confidential documents, including bank statements and vendor contracts. I couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. This was my mother, after all. So I planted fake financial projections showing the restaurant was on the verge of bankruptcy in a folder marked Confidential Latest Projections. Within days, Marcus suddenly changed tactics, suggesting a family management team that could combine all our strengths. When I reviewed his proposed structure, I noticed it gave him controlling interest in all decisions, with me essentially working for him. It was clear he'd seen the fake projections and thought the business was failing. I arranged a private meeting with Mom at her favorite bakery, hoping for an honest conversation. Instead of accusations, I asked open-ended questions about her concerns for the future. She broke down after her second cup of coffee, admitting she was terrified of losing her home. Apparently, Marcus had convinced her that Dad had left significant debts, and that the restaurant was her only potential source of retirement income. I was floored. Dad had been meticulous about financial planning. The next day, I showed Mom copies of Dad's actual retirement accounts and life insurance policies that had more than paid off their mortgage and provided a solid retirement fund. She seemed genuinely confused, claiming Marcus had told her these accounts had been depleted, covering restaurant debts in Dad's final year. I realized Marcus had been deliberately misleading our mother to gain her support. I contacted RT, my personal financial advisor, and arranged for him to meet with Mom to explain her actual financial situation. When we arrived at RT's office, Marcus showed up uninvited, immediately questioning RT's qualifications and suggesting he was colluding with me. Despite Marcus's interruptions, RT clearly demonstrated that Mom was actually financially secure through Dad's careful planning. The meeting ended with Mom clearly confused about who to believe. Later that week, I discovered Marcus had been pressuring Mom to sign paperwork, transferring her joint ownership stakes in the family home and some investment accounts. The documents required notarization, so I took the extraordinary step of contacting every local notary with a warning about potential elder manipulation involving my mother. Marcus apparently caught wind of this and brought in a notary from 2 towns over, but Uncle Buster accidentally spilled an entire cup of coffee on the documents before they could be signed. Marcus was furious and had to redraft everything. Mom finally admitted she felt caught between her children, but still couldn't stop seeking Marcus's approval. He was always more fragile than you, she told me one afternoon. You were always so independent, but Marcus needed more validation. I suggested family therapy to address the unhealthy dynamics that had developed. Surprisingly, Mom agreed, and we found a therapist named Sasha who specialized in family business conflicts. Marcus reluctantly attended one session, sitting stiffly on the couch and giving minimal responses to Sasha's questions. When Sasha gently pointed out his pattern of undermining me, he declared therapy a waste of time and refused to return for a second session. Mom had to choose between continuing therapy with me or siding with Marcus and boycotting it. To my relief, she chose to continue the sessions, which helped her begin recognizing the manipulation tactics Marcus had been using. Unfortunately, Marcus showed up at Mom's house the following weekend with luggage, claiming he'd been kicked out of his rental due to plumbing issues. Mom immediately invited him to stay, giving him round-the-clock access to influence her. I responded by installing a home security system at Mom's house, claiming I was worried about recent break-ins in her neighborhood. While the security concerns weren't entirely fabricated, my real purpose was to monitor Marcus's manipulation. The system's activity log showed Marcus frequently entering Mom's home office late at night, and the audio eventually captured him pressuring her to sign papers after she'd taken her sleep medication. I decided to try a different approach by hosting a community appreciation night at the restaurant, inviting longtime customers to enjoy complimentary appetizers and share memories of dining there over the years. The day before the event, several suppliers called to confirm that their orders had been canceled. Apparently, Marcus had contacted them claiming the event wasn't happening. I scrambled to arrange last-minute deliveries at premium prices just to make sure we had enough food. Despite the sabotage, the event was packed with customers eager to share their memories of Dad in the restaurant. Many brought old photos of family celebrations held there over the decades. Marcus showed up halfway through and tried to take credit for the idea, telling everyone he wanted to reconnect with, the community. I was seething but kept my cool until I overheard him telling Mrs. Perkins, who'd been coming every Sunday for 30 years, about his plans to modernize the outdated menu. I interrupted politely and then publicly recounted my years keeping the restaurant afloat, including covering shifts when Dad was first diagnosed with heart problems. Several local business owners expressed concern about rumors they'd heard about the restaurant possibly closing or changing hands. I reassured them of my commitment to maintaining the restaurant as a neighborhood institution. We ended up forming an informal alliance of local businesses, agreeing to cross-promote and support each other. KB from the Neighborhood Association offered to feature the restaurant in their local revitalization campaign, complete with a profile in their widely read newsletter. When Marcus tried to position himself as the face of the business during KB's interview, I finally had to produce a copy of the will to prove my ownership. The community publicity generated an influx of new customers, along with the return of people who hadn't visited in years. The restaurant suddenly went from struggling to fill tables on weeknights to being completely booked most evenings. We weren't prepared for the volume, and I had to quickly hire and train new servers and kitchen staff. Marcus criticized every new hire, claiming they weren't up to his standards, but customers repeatedly told me they loved the authentic family atmosphere and traditional dishes. When I introduced a few menu updates based on customer feedback, Marcus began telling anyone who would listen that I was ruining their father's legacy with unnecessary changes. A local reporter contacted me about doing a feature story on the restaurant's renaissance for the City magazine. During her research, she spoke with Marcus, who gave her information that completely contradicted what I told her about our plans. Confused by the conflicting stories, she decided to dig deeper into what she called the family angle of the story. What she uncovered was something even I didn't know. Marcus's supposedly successful Manhattan restaurant had actually failed 6 months before Dad's death. He'd been essentially unemployed when Dad died, which explained his sudden interest in a restaurant he'd ignored for years. When the reporter called to verify this information, I was speechless. I considered using this information publicly, but decided it would just escalate the conflict and potentially harm the restaurant's reputation. Instead, I met with Marcus privately and offered him a salaried chef position with no ownership stake. I framed it as a way for him to rebuild his reputation while being part of the family business. Marcus rejected the job offer as insulting and stormed out. Later that week, I noticed he'd started an Instagram account positioning himself as the creative force behind our restaurant's classic dishes. He was claiming partial credit for recipes to build his personal brand, apparently hoping to leverage our restaurant's growing reputation. Things got even messier when a food blogger recognized one of Marcus's signature dishes as something she'd seen published in a cooking magazine years earlier. When confronted, Marcus claimed the magazine had stolen the recipe from him during a freelance project. I spent an evening researching the recipe's origins and discovered Marcus had plagiarized several recipes throughout his career, making only minor modifications before claiming them as his own creations. Dad had either never realized this or had chosen to overlook it. Exposing Marcus would damage the family name and potentially the restaurant, so I confronted him privately with the evidence. He immediately threatened to sue me for defamation if I shared my discoveries with anyone. Fortunately, I'd recorded our conversation where he essentially admitted the plagiarism, giving me leverage against his legal threats. We were approached by a regional restaurant association about hosting a chef's collaboration event featuring several notable local chefs. I agreed enthusiastically, seeing it as great publicity. The night of the event, Marcus showed up in Chef White's claiming to be part of the lineup. I hadn't included him in the planning, but now faced a difficult choice. Create a scene by having having him removed or allow him to participate. With food critics and influential community members present, I reluctantly let him cook. To my surprise, he actually impressed guests with his technical skills and plating techniques. For a brief moment, watching him expertly sear scallops to perfection, I considered whether cooperation might actually be possible. That consideration evaporated the following week when I was served with legal papers. Marcus had filed a formal challenge to the will, claiming Dad lacked mental capacity when making the changes that favored me. His lawyer, a slick guy named Jeff, advised him it was a weak case according to the legal notice, but they were proceeding anyway. Their strategy focused on pressuring family members to testify about Dad's supposed mental decline in his final months. Cousin Isabella, who's a nurse at the local hospital, agreed to support Marcus's claims about Dad's mental state. The irony was that Isabella had rarely visited Dad during his illness. I know because I was there daily and kept a visitor log at the nurse's suggestion. I gathered Dad's medical records, which clearly documented his mental clarity until the very end, with the attending physician specifically noting his sharp mind and decision-making capacity, even during hospitalization. As the initial court hearing approached, I prepared with my lawyer, but the mounting legal fees were draining the restaurant's improving but still fragile reserves. I reluctantly approached the bank about a small business loan to cover operating expenses during the litigation. The loan officer was hesitant about approving financing with the pending litigation, but was impressed by the restaurant's recent improved performance. After reviewing our books, he offered conditional approval dependent on the case's resolution, which wasn't ideal but gave us some breathing room. Marcus proposed an out-of-court settlement that would give him 60% ownership of the restaurant. Reading through the detailed terms, I realized the agreement would essentially force me out within a year through a series of clauses giving him veto power over all decisions. I countered with a final 75-25 split in my favor, with clearly defined roles that would keep him in the kitchen and me running the business. Marcus rejected my counteroffer immediately and escalated his legal strategy, filing additional motions claiming I had manipulated Dad during his illness. His strategy backfired when his lawyer quit after discovering Marcus had misrepresented several key facts about Dad's condition and the timeline of events. Marcus scrambled to find new representation, eventually hiring a lawyer named Kylo, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics in inheritance disputes. During our first court appearance, Kylo made several inflammatory allegations that clearly surprised the judge with their lack of supporting evidence. Though Marcus seemed pleased with Kylo's aggressive approach, the lawyer demanded a large retainer up front before continuing the case. I later learned Marcus had approached Mom for money to pay his legal fees, suggesting she liquidate her retirement account as just a temporary measure. Fortunately, Sasha from therapy had been helping Mom recognize manipulation tactics, and she finally refused to finance the lawsuit. Without sufficient funds to pay his aggressive attorney, Marcus shifted to intimidating me directly. He cornered me in the walk-in refrigerator one morning, suggesting that accidents happen in kitchens all the time, and it would be a shame if something forced the restaurant to close temporarily. Uncle Buster, who'd been helping out as a host a few nights a week, witnessed Marcus's increasing aggression and installed additional cameras throughout the restaurant. The footage captured Marcus's threats, which my lawyer immediately included in our court filings. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including Dad's consistent medical records and the multiple consistent versions of his will over the years, all showing his clear intention. However, to be thorough, she ordered a formal mental capacity evaluation review of Dad's medical records by an independent expert. This meant both Marcus and I had to wait another month for resolution, keeping the restaurant in limbo. During this waiting period, Marcus approached several of my employees, offering them positions, when he takes over, with significantly higher salaries than I could afford to pay. Most remained loyal, telling me about his attempts, but he specifically targeted Jade, our newest chef who had been creating popular weekend specials. Marcus offered her a substantial salary and creative control at what he described as his new venture. Jade considered his offer for a few days, but ultimately told me about the attempted poaching. Based on what Marcus had told her, I realized he was planning to open a competing restaurant nearby, presumably using our family recipes and concepts. Some discreet research confirmed my suspicion. Marcus had leased a commercial space just 3 blocks away through a shell company named MK Ventures. County permit applications showed he'd been planning this since, shortly after Dad's death, regardless of the inheritance outcome. The mental capacity evaluation conclusively showed Dad was fully competent when changing his will, with the expert noting there was no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment affecting decision-making capacity. Marcus immediately filed for an extension, claiming the expert had insufficient information, which the judge reluctantly granted, extending our legal limbo another 6 weeks. My lawyer suggested an aggressive counter-strategy of suing Marcus for harassment, defamation, and legal fees, presenting all the evidence of his undermining and threats. While the case seemed strong, pursuing it would deplete even more of our financial resources and drag out the conflict. I had to decide whether to escalate or find another solution that might finally end this nightmare. Around this time, Mom started behaving strangely, taking secretive phone calls and seeming unusually nervous whenever Marcus and I were both present. I initially assumed she was just stressed about the ongoing conflict, but when I noticed her hiding something in her handbag when I entered her kitchen one afternoon, I became suspicious. I confronted her about the secretive calls, but instead of answering directly, she broke down completely, sobbing at her kitchen table in a way I hadn't seen since Dad's funeral. Between tears, she revealed that she'd found a box of old letters from Dad in the attic while looking for photo albums. She'd initially hidden them from both Marcus and me because she'd been afraid of making the situation worse. It turned out Dad had written detailed explanations for his decision about the restaurant's inheritance, but Mom had been protecting Marcus from the harsh truths contained in the letters. Both of us realized it was finally time to end the conflict that was tearing our family apart. The letters described how Dad had always seen my dedication to the restaurant, even when he wasn't openly acknowledging it. He regretted his favoritism toward Marcus and had been trying to correct it in his final years. Marcus has talent, he wrote, but Olivia has heart, loyalty, and the work ethic this business needs to survive. Mom finally accepted that Dad's decision had been intentional and fair, not the result of manipulation or confusion as Marcus had claimed. With tears in her eyes, Mom tried to show Marcus the letters the next day, but he refused to even look at them, accusing her of siding against him. After years of being the favored child, he couldn't accept this rejection. Mom made the painful decision to testify against him in court, bringing Dad's letters as evidence of his clear intentions. Marcus was visibly shocked by what he perceived as his mother's betrayal when she entered the courtroom and sat on my side of the aisle. He continued pressing his case, but his arguments grew increasingly desperate and contradictory. During a particularly heated court exchange, Marcus accused me of sabotaging his culinary career out of jealousy. In his emotional state, he inadvertently revealed his history of taking credit for others' work, mentioning how he'd improved recipes from his various restaurant positions. The judge's expression made it clear his credibility had completely collapsed. The judge ruled entirely in my favor, dismissed all of Marcus's claims, and ordered him to pay a portion of my legal fees, calling his lawsuit frivolous and unsupported by any credible evidence. Marcus declared he would appeal as he stormed out of the courtroom, meaning our family conflict seemed destined to continue indefinitely. That night, I stopped by the restaurant after hours to finish some paperwork. I was surprised to find the back door unlocked, and even more surprised to discover Marcus sitting alone in the dimly lit dining room. Instead of the anger I expected, He was sobbing quietly while looking through an old family photo album he must have taken from Mom's house. For the first time in years, I saw his vulnerability instead of his arrogance. I sat down at the table with him, and we finally had an honest conversation. Years of resentment made it difficult to find the right words, so we focused on memories of Dad rather than arguing about the inheritance. Marcus admitted he had felt trapped by Dad's expectations throughout his childhood and early career. Everyone always told me I was just like him, he said, wiping his eyes. But I never had his patience or his genuine love for feeding people. I just had some of his technical skills. He confessed he'd been trying to escape Dad's shadow by making a name for himself in New York, but had failed spectacularly when his restaurant closed. He finally acknowledged that my passion for the restaurant was genuine while his had always been complicated by his need to prove himself. We opened a bottle of Dad's favorite whiskey from the bar and shared stories about him, both the good and difficult memories. As Marcus was describing Dad teaching him to make pasta at age 10, a small electrical fire suddenly sparked in one of the old kitchen outlets. We both jumped up and grabbed extinguishers, working in perfect synchronization to put it out before it could spread. The fire damaged part of the kitchen wall but revealed something unexpected, an old safe that had been covered by cabinetry during a renovation years earlier. We called Mom to ask if she knew about it or had the combination. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas and robe, with an old birthday as the potential combination. We tried several family birthdays without success. Then Marcus suddenly tried my birthday, which surprisingly worked. Inside the safe, we found our grandfather's original handwritten recipes and a sealed letter addressed specifically to my children when they finally worked together. We looked at each other in disbelief, realizing Dad had somehow anticipated this moment of reconciliation. Dad's letter outlined his vision for the restaurant's future run by both of us using our complementary skills, Marcus's culinary creativity and my business acumen and community connections. Neither of you is complete without the other, he wrote. The restaurant needs both the heart that keeps it running and the talent that makes it special. The letter emphasized that this partnership could only work with mutual respect and recognition of each other's contributions. After reading the letter together, Marcus offered to drop all legal challenges, admitting the fight had been more about his wounded pride than actual desire to run the restaurant alone. He asked for a role in the kitchen, suggesting he could help modernize some aspects of the menu while preserving Dad's classics. I considered a new arrangement with clear boundaries that would allow us to work together without the power struggles that had defined our relationship for years. We drafted a potential working agreement over breakfast the next morning, but I could see Marcus still struggled with not being in charge of everything. I suggested a 3-month trial period before making anything permanent, which he reluctantly accepted. When we announced our truce to the family, several relatives remained openly skeptical, particularly Uncle Pete, who had witnessed our most heated arguments. Uncle Buster proposed a formal contract with specific consequences for undermining each other, which actually helped ease tensions by creating clear expectations. Over the next few weeks, Marcus brought innovative menu ideas that could attract new customers while I focused on maintaining our operational excellence. I worried about alienating loyal patrons with too many changes, so we created a split menu that honored traditions while introducing new concepts on a rotating seasonal section. The new menu launched successfully, with longtime customers appreciating that their favorites remained untouched, while new patrons excited about Marcus's more contemporary offerings. Behind the scenes, Marcus grew frustrated with my oversight of purchasing and pricing, but we established weekly meetings to improve communication before small irritations could grow into major conflicts. A prominent food critic visited to review the reimagined restaurant about a month into our new arrangement. Her review praised the food but noted the palpable family discord, still evident in the awkward kitchen dynamics. Marcus took the criticism personally and temporarily reverted to blaming me for micromanaging his creative process. Instead of rising to the bait, I remained focused on solutions, suggesting ways we could improve the customer experience together. Gradually, he adjusted his reactive behavior pattern as he saw I wasn't trying to undermine him. Mom began joining our weekly meetings as a mediator, though she sometimes fell into old habits of favoring Marcus's ideas over mine. I had to repeatedly assert my position as owner while still respecting his culinary expertise. With our combined talents, the restaurant's finances improved dramatically. Success brought new opportunities, including an investor offering to franchise our concept in neighboring cities. Marcus enthusiastically supported expansion, seeing it as a chance to finally build something significant, while I feared losing the restaurant's soul if we grew too quickly. We visited several successful family restaurants that had expanded cautiously, learning from both their successes and mistakes. After researching various growth models, I proposed a compromise of opening one additional location in a nearby town with a similar demographic to our current customers. I was shocked to discover Marcus had already discussed multiple locations with potential investors without consulting me, creating another potential rift just as we were finding our balance. Our disagreement escalated until Mom reminded us of Dad's letter emphasizing collaboration. Marcus argued that Dad couldn't have anticipated such an opportunity, while I maintained that rapid expansion would dilute the quality and personal touch that made our restaurant special. I suggested consulting the community that had supported us through the difficult months. We hosted a special dinner to discuss the restaurant's future with longtime customers, local business owners, and new patrons. Opinions were divided, with some excited about having our food available in more locations, while others worried we'd lose what made us special. We realized we'd never satisfy everyone, and ultimately had to trust our own judgment about the right path forward. Late one night after this community dinner, we were cleaning the kitchen together when Marcus playfully flicked some soapy water at me. I retaliated by tossing a handful of flour in his direction, and suddenly we were engaged in a full-blown food fight like when we were kids. Our laughter echoed through the empty restaurant, and I realized our relationship was finally healing beyond just business concerns. The next day, I presented a comprehensive business plan for careful expansion that included strict quality controls and family presence requirements for any new location. Marcus reviewed it thoroughly and finally admitted my business acumen complemented his culinary creativity in ways that could make expansion successful without losing our identity. We agreed to open a second location in a neighboring town that had been requesting our catering services for years. When we began property hunting, we discovered the ideal location was already under contract. Some investigation revealed the buyer was actually Marcus's abandoned competing restaurant shell company, MK Ventures. Marcus admitted he never canceled the property deal after our reconciliation, but offered to transfer it to our joint venture at his cost. This gesture helped me begin to truly trust his commitment to our partnership. We developed a unique concept for the second location that would honor Dad, while allowing more of Marcus's contemporary influence. The design required significant investment in kitchen equipment and interior renovations, forcing us to secure additional financing. The bank approved our loan based on the original restaurant's improved performance, but required both of us to personally guarantee it, which meant we needed to formalize our business partnership with clear percentages and responsibilities. Mom asked to invest some of her own money in the expansion, seeing it as a way to be part of the legacy. We worried about her retirement security despite her improved financial literacy, so we created a special non-voting stake that guaranteed minimum returns without exposing her to risk if the expansion struggled. Construction began on the second location amid great community interest, but we quickly encountered unexpected structural issues when removing some walls. The building needed significant reinforcement, requiring me to divert resources from the original restaurant temporarily to keep the project on schedule. With me focused on the construction crisis, Marcus stepped up to manage the original location independently. He struggled initially without my systems and oversight, gaining new appreciation for the operational complexities I'd managed for years. By the time he called me in a panic over a supplier dispute, he had developed genuine respect for my contributions beyond just paperwork. As opening day approached for the new location, we disagreed on final design elements. I wanted to replicate some key features from the original restaurant for consistency, while Marcus pushed for a more contemporary atmosphere. Instead of our old pattern of digging in our heels, we actually listened to each other's reasoning and created a space that perfectly balanced tradition and innovation. The grand opening attracted food critics, local dignitaries, and curious foodies from across the region. Just as the first guests arrived, a transformer blew nearby, leaving the entire block without power. Instead of panicking, Marcus and I smoothly implemented a romantic candlelit contingency plan, serving cold appetizers while the emergency generator powered essential cooking equipment. The unexpected intimacy of the candlelit dinner actually enhanced the experience, with guests calling it magical in social media posts. The event was deemed a huge success, with reservations filling up for months. Later that night, as we celebrated with the staff, I noticed Marcus seemed strangely melancholy despite the successful launch. I found him in the kitchen, staring at the framed photo of Dad we'd hung near the pass station. He admitted he wished Dad could see them working together, but worried Anton would still favor his contributions over mine. I shared entries from Dad's journal I'd found while organizing office files, including numerous passages praising both his children's unique gifts. The journal revealed that Dad had always intended for us to run the restaurant together, but feared forcing Marcus would drive him away completely. The entries showed Dad's complicated love for both of us and his regret over the favoritism that had damaged our relationship. Both of us finally understood our father's intentions more clearly. The family held a private ceremony installing matching plaques honoring Dad in both restaurants. During the unveiling, Marcus surprised me by insisting on adding my name as the heart of our family's legacy. For the first time, I felt my contributions fully acknowledged by the person whose approval I'd unconsciously sought for decades. A year after Dad's death, we hosted a memorial dinner with the entire extended family. Rather than the somber occasion we'd planned, it became a celebration of both Dad's life and the restaurant's new chapter. Uncle Buster gave a toast comparing our journey to Dad's signature sourdough bread. Sometimes things have to go through a difficult fermentation to rise properly. As I looked around at my family enjoying a meal in the restaurant Dad had built and I had saved, I realized the inheritance hadn't just been about the restaurant. It was about rediscovering what family truly means.